Hey, this is the first last Nerdom, and today we're going to find out if you're a replicant or a replicant. And I'm that's my funny way of saying we're going to be talking about the Blade Runner. I guess it's now a multiverse or universe. I guess it's more of a universe than a multiverse. I'm Thomas, and with me is Mike Shaw. How you go? How's things going? If I could
I
talk.
am I am doing just fine with my implanted memories and everything.
Yes.
And
Yes,
acid
that's
rain.
uh uh there's a lot of stuff to dive into with these movies. And well, I guess I'll start. We could both start with how we first became aware of these movies.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
I was a young lad when Blade Runner came out, and I was very excited. Han Solo in a science fiction movie, oh my gosh, how
Mm-hmm.
could how could this go wrong? And but and then I found out it was R-rated, and I couldn't go to R-rated movies, and I was very crushed. And I ended up having to go see ET instead. But yeah, it was a tragedy. However, there was a tiny bit of a silver lining in that Marvel Comics came out with a comic book adaptation. Uh, they two variations. They had a big deluxe magazine, and then I think later they serialized it into a mini series with
Okay.
2 or 3 issues. I got the as soon as that magazine came out, I bought that, and then I poured over that, read it over and over, just stared at all the images. I love the story. I'm sure it was a bit above my head, but I was amazed by just the still images. Look, the art in it is really good. I forgot to maybe grab some of those images, but you could tell that the artist had reference stills, or at least had seen the movie to be able to draw the comic book. But yeah, so that sustained me. And I was looking it up, and it goes for a pretty penny now. I think about between 60 and $150 for the magazine. But
Oh wow.
mine's so abused. I don't think I could get anywhere near something like that. But yeah, I was very enamored with the movie. And then I got to see the edited TV version, which I loved it. And we maybe go into it a little bit more, but there's, I think, at least 9 versions I saw of this movie. So that was my first version.
Awesome.
And later on, I was old enough to rent R-rated movies, and I got to rent the VHS of it. So I've never seen this movie in the theater, which if I had an opportunity, I would definitely do. But what's your experience with the movie?
Yeah, as all a lot of my earlier introduction to earlier movies and concepts and Ridley Scott and some of the directors my dad liked to follow. My dad, no surprise there, but we watched it. We sat down and watched it years after it had been on. Like I can't remember
Mhm.
my age. I was probably preteen or teen, something like that. But we sat down and watched it, and I was blown away by the just the visual aspects of it.
Mhm.
I honestly, I don't remember I don't recall the plot
Mhm.
too much, or like
Mhm.
necessarily understanding
Mhm.
everything that was going on at that point in
Mhm.
time. I kind of got the broad brush strokes of like the world
Mhm.
sucks, or in the future,
Yeah.
something to do with robots and emotion, and some other
Mhm.
things, and obviously Harrison Ford too. But this is like one that my dad had introduced to me,
Yeah.
and I loved. I grew to love it. I didn't think it was the most amazing thing I ever saw when I saw it,
Mhm.
but it did stick with me
Mhm.
for a long period of time. And then as I got
Mhm.
older, I kind of fell back in love with it, but more
Mhm.
on a more cerebral level of
Mhm.
you know the bigger overarching concepts that are going on, not just that it looks just. This
Mhm.
is both of these movies too are just they have a vision, and you can
Mhm.
see them very clearly, and not just that, but it's just kind of like whenever I watch it, I just feel like there's this whole atmosphere that kind of rolls in from the screen and encompasses everything that you really feel part of it. It's
Yeah.
For the year that it was made and who made it and everything else, it just stands out even more
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. It's one of those movies that couldn't go wrong. You had Harrison Ford off the success of Star Wars. You had Ridley Scott coming off the success of Alien. You're basing it on a classic science fiction novel, but it was pretty much a flop when it first came out. It didn't find its its bearing until its audience until videotape. So
like many great good sci-fi franchises or whatever you want to call them, or just concepts, it didn't catch on until that cult following.
It was
later.
It was very much before its time, and
I would agree with that.
it's one of those movies that kind of set a precedent, and then all the movie, and then those people, the audience that it finds, latches onto it, and then I wouldn't say dilutes the elements of it, but they do get inspired by those elements, and you see those elements come back in various movies like Seven. Seven has a very visual stake in that, and then there's that that one movie Black Rain. That's another thriller that is heavily inspired by the whole. I think it takes place in Tokyo, and it's raining constantly, and it definitely has that vibe of Blade Runner. And I think Ridley Scott says that his visual take on it was very much based on the artwork of Mobius, and the just being in Tokyo, seeing all the lights and everything, and it very much inspired his visual take on it. And you can't take anything away from the production design and the miniature people, and I mean the special effects in this is top notch. And
for the time, absolutely, it is a treasure, and it only grows with time. I can't wait to. I don't. This isn't one that I will routinely watch over the years. Like there is just some movies that they're what I like to do. This is one I like to more revisit every so often, and watch it, and then it invariably spins off other kind of shows and influences that, like Westworld. There's a little bit of Westworld in this, although that was made, I believe, before this. But still, it casts a very unique. Once again, one of the tropes that always is kind of reimagined constantly in sci-fi material are like machines and man. And what does that mean? And not to get, I don't want to get too highbrow and jump into the weeds, but it has it in spades for sure.
And we're going on the assumption that anyone that's clicked on this is familiar with the movies, but just in case you're just a follower of our channel and are being introduced to this for the first time, this is it's a science fiction movie. It took place in the future, but is now in the past. It takes place in 2019. It was made in 1982, so they thought that was distant future. But so this is what their vision of 2019 was. Right before the the pandemic. But basically the story of they're making these androids, or what they call replicants, which they're not your traditional androids in that they're made of flesh and blood, but they're hyper. They can withstand heat and cold, and they're very strong. But there's some that have gone rogue, that want to not be put in, be slaves, essentially, and they rebel against their human masters. And the main character is Richard Decker, and he's a Blade Runner, which they hunt down, and they don't kill them, they retire these replicants. And so he's and and he's actually at the start of the movie. He's retired Blade Runner. He's out of the business. He's not working for the police anymore, and the police pulls him back in for one last job, and it kind of sounds, the just describing it kind of sounds kind of the cliche sort of noir, or your basic police story, which I guess the story does have a very simplistic structure, but it's what it does with that structure that makes it all more fascinating.
Yeah, it's got a little noir to it, or noir-esque
Definitely.
kind of feel to it, for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
It has that, I wouldn't go so far as to say like a Maltese Falcon or something like that, but it
Right.
definitely
No.
has. It carries its own world very well.
Yes. And yeah, and one of the things, in like you were saying, each time you revisit it, you find something different. I
Exactly.
wasn't I was so familiar with this movie, I've seen it so many times that I wasn't sure if I had time to watch it again before we discussed it. And then there's a Blade Runner anime that just came out, I think at the end of last year, called
Netflix, right?
it was a
Or no?
production of Crunchyroll and
Okay,
Adult Swim, but it's actually on HBO Max right now, and I think Hulu. But yeah, it's called Blade Runner Black Lotus. So I thought, well, since we're discussing all things Blade Runner, might as well give it a shot. It's a 13
sure.
episode series, and it's not too bad. It takes the perspective of a replicant girl who has no memory of her past, which is very much different than what the previous two movies are, which takes the perspective of a Blade Runner hunting down the replicants. And it was okay. I can't really give you a full opinion of it. I only watched one episode, but after watching that episode, it really made me want to watch Blade Runner again. And so
Really?
I dived back into Blade Runner, and I just love that movie. That this time, I thought that I'd pretty much soaked everything out of that movie, but I saw things that maybe I'd seen before and forgot, but stuff that I saw in this one that I was like, oh wow, okay, and I don't think I've noticed that before. And again, I watched the final cut. Like I said, there's 9 different versions. The theatrical one, Ridley Scott wasn't really happy with, but he put it out there as a compromise to the studio. They felt that people would be confused by the story, so they added in a lot of Harrison Ford, the Decker character, doing kind of voiceovers, very much like a film noir type movie where
Right.
he's kind of discussing what's going on. And the final cut takes all of that out. You don't really need all of that, and I like that version the best, the final cut.
Yeah, I think this was back when Ridley Scott was not perceived as being long in the tooth, or things of that nature, like when he was still hitting his stride. Um,
Mhm.
and say what you will about his current, I will always be a Ridley Scott fan no matter what. Even if he makes a bad movie, I'll still find joy in it, unless it's really bad. But still,
Mhm.
which I haven't met yet. But in any case, this is back when he hit his stride. He hit again. This is the difference between artists that can see something and then create it their mind's eye and then share that with the world, and then be able to do that successfully to
Yeah,
cut through a lot of that.
yeah.
That I have not. I believe I've seen the director's cut and the original version, and that's probably about it for me. Like I
Mhm.
would be
Yeah,
interested to kind of see if that, but
yeah.
a little Blade Runner goes a long way for me. So, like I said, I'll revisit it every decade or 5 years or
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned this one, and it has a hook too for the more modern day version of it, but
Mhm.
it was very very well done. And
Yeah.
again, it was
Mhm.
not a success at all at the box office. Like, and
No,
that's
no.
probably a good thing in retrospect, because who knows what it, I don't know. That's a question nobody can answer really, but
Well,
still.
and yeah, I don't think that audience at the time was ready for it. It,
You
like I
know,
said, it's very much ahead of its time, and um, that's in another thing about the movie, and it has a very dark tone to it, which I love, but it did well overseas. The American audience wants that feel good movie. Not that there's anything wrong with it. The Marvel movies cater to that larger than life, big action, big story, lots of laughs. But this is definitely not that movie. There are some laughs in it, but it's at the expense of the main character getting hurt
right.
a lot of the times. And but yeah, it's one of those movies. I noticed this after I watched it. A lot of the movies that you watch over and over, you love those movies, but a lot of times you're like waiting for that big scene. Oh, okay. Let's get through this scene because I want to get to this next scene that's huge, whereas this movie, I every time I watch it, it seems like I'm watching it for the first time because I'm noticing things. I'm not going, oh, I need to see this next scene. It's like, oh well, each scene is like a relation to me, in that there's
Right.
so much going on the screen. There's so many visual aspects, and then there's the acting. There's an interrogation scene at the beginning of the movie that's just classic. There's a machine
People.
called the Voight Comp machine that is there, and they ask questions of these people they suspect are replicants, and it's just a very unnerving scene because you're trying to figure out what's going on, what's this device, and there's so many questions which get answered obviously in the movie, but it's such a rich world. It's a living, breathing world that you're just fascinated by, and you could pull so much from just a repeated viewing. I found myself looking out into the crowd and looking at all the various looks and
Oh yeah.
designs elements of everything.
Yeah, I'm just as guilty. I'll see like something that catches my eye, and then I'll go back and rewatch it, whatever. But this is this also touches like another line or kind of movies or genre that I like. It touches on that psyche sphere of human consciousness, and
Mhm,
I love that. It does it in its own way. It's not quite as deep as like say other things that I've watched that are
mhm,
100% to do
mhm,
like David Lynch loves playing in that
mhm,
and that pool, so to
mhm.
speak. There's
Yeah.
like I've also mentioned True
Mhm,
Detective that have kind of like this weird kind of blend of some metaphysics kind of thing going on, and it's also like, are you really seeing that or not?
yeah.
Consciousness and everything that
Mhm,
goes in there,
mhm,
and the levels, morality,
mhm.
the vision, just who am I? I mean, empathy, even
Yeah.
all kinds of these things kind of rolled up in a very dark
Mhm, mhm.
world.
Yeah, it's one of the great things about science fiction, I believe, is that it can examine really deep questions in a really you could kind of step away from things and kind of look at it at a distance, and then you could just do that. You could just watch it as a movie, but then you could step forward and start applying it to, okay, what does this mean to me?
Right.
It really examines what it is to be human. Both this movie and the sequel
Oh yeah.
over in 2004 49, that movie may be even more so. uh but this movie, I think both movies don't have, they're not plot heavy movies. It's very emotional based, and going into your head and the head of the characters, and looking at their motivations. Like in this movie, that when I watched it as a kid, there was a clear bad guys and good guy, whereas now when I'm looking at it today, I'm like, who really is the bad guy here?
Right. Yeah.
Is there a bad guy?
Right. Yeah. The best sci-fi or books, just the best fiction in general, not just limited to sci-fi, but the best one is it doesn't tell you what to think.
Mhm.
it leads you along, but
Mhm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that's how you have to think or how it is or whatever. Like that
Mhm.
provokes that thought process. And really,
Mhm.
the really best ones are where it kind of leaves you like with this, I don't know, out of body, or kind of like, I'm not quite sure how I felt about that.
Mhm.
And really
Well,
forces you
yeah,
to kind of
yeah.
go back and see.
Mhm.
You're provoked a little bit for this one. I think that arguably, the second one, or the sequel to it, more modern day one, as we're kind of rolling into it, um,
Mhm.
does that too in its own way.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
the
and
visuals,
mhm.
the cinematography are
Mhm.
world building is
Mhm.
A plus all
Yeah,
across the board. Whether you like it or not,
yeah,
you
mhm.
can't walk away from this movie being like, I don't know what that world looked like. Nobody,
Yeah.
even if you hate it, you can't
Yeah.
walk away from that and say,
Mhm.
I didn't know
Mhm.
what it was about. Like that's just
Yeah,
not. Nobody will ever
yeah,
say that.
yeah, and speaking of people hating it, and being provocative, there is the controversial love scene in it, where people have gone back and are throwing around the R word, with it, that he's very forceful
Oh,
with the character.
I had
And
not caught on to that criticism.
yeah, yeah, and uh, it's, I think it's there to challenge you. It's like anything else in this movie, it's there to really
Right,
challenge you. Is like, okay, is he going too far with her? What's the dynamic there? Is he treating her as a replicant
right.
or as a person? And um in how she responds is interesting too. And I don't think your movie should have a clear good guy and a bad guy, as long as it gets you thinking.
Right.
And I, as a kid, I saw Decker as the hero, as the main guy. But there's a real interesting dynamic of, is he really? And and you can see through the whole movie, he's almost constantly drunk in this movie. And it's, I think it's, he's having trouble, and he's retired at the beginning of the movie, so something's bothering him, and he didn't want to come back.
Right.
And going through this process of going through this once again of hunting replicants, you can see the toll it's taking on his soul. And
You,
so yeah, that it really makes you
you
think.
you also have kind of echoes of
Mhm.
like the travels of the convert, so to speak. So
Mhm.
you have a character, starting on one side of the aisle of definitely feeling and thinking a certain way,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
as you kind of see, you kind of see them convert over, and then
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then the it's not quite as clear cut as that, but there are echoes of that, like where you start on one side and you come over here, and then it's just like, how does that leave the character? And
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
really, I think, will play very strongly as the story goes on and we
Mhm.
revisit the story in Blade
Mhm.
2049. And with that being said, we've kind of taken a minute here to go over our the first one, and how could we not? How could we not?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's the one that set the table.
Mhm.
Not only that, but set everything nice, tall, and deep for sure.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
and what were your thoughts on how the second one, the sequel, the Blade Runner
Mhm.
2049, ran into things? What was your take on that overall?
Well, we had to welcome back our guy, Denis Villeneuve,
Yes, we
back to the
did,
scene. He's our longtime favorite from this channel. He directs this
for
one,
sure.
and you see the love he has for the original movie in this movie. And sometimes a director going to revisit a property that they loved as a kid, or they sometimes fumble and stumble and miss the ball, because maybe they're so much in love with it that they can't do a new take, or they want to put too much into it. I kind of look towards Peter Jackson's King Kong as a fumble. He loved the King Kong movie, and that movie just doesn't work for me. Peter Jackson's King Kong, and
Sure,
you
Jack
know.
Black didn't have anything to do with it.
I don't know. No, well, we'll just get into the discussion of it. We may at a future time if we want
Sure.
to kind of revisit that movie, but yeah, and I think he fell in love with the idea of doing 3-hour movies, and that movie just doesn't need to be that. But yeah, with this, Denny, he takes all the elements of the original, and he's not the writer on this one. There's some other writers, but him and the writers take all the elements from the original movie and expand on it, and bring more life to it. They don't beat you over the head with it. They take new takes on it, because at this time the Blade Runner is also a replicant. So he's a replicant hunting replicants. So he's going out and killing his own kind, which is kind of interesting. They're still going after rogue replicants, and he's working as a replicant for the police force, and he has to get a baseline each time he goes back in, make sure he's not going off the deep end, so to speak, and
compromise emotionally, or what
yeah,
he still can do his job and duties or whatever the thing is. Yeah,
yeah.
it's and Ryan Gosling plays. He does a great job. This is another one where nobody upstage anybody else, even Harrison Ford. And I love that Denis can do that time and time again. And it's not just clearly. There are some movies where who was paid the most money, and it ruins the film. This was not one of them. This is again, for taking something like just the cinematography and the visuals and the vision.
Yeah,
it would be very hard to replicate that in no pun intended or intended in the original. And this one, yet he has a master's eye of being able to paint a world and just kind of see, like, it's even more downbeat than it was in the first one we saw, that we were exposed to.
Although you get to and then to piggyback on what you were saying, the not shortchange the acting in the original, we didn't want to go we didn't want to go into spoilers, but there's a speech by the Rutger Hauer character at the end of the original Blade Runner that's a classic speech that that really affects me every time I see it. And in this movie, there's the acting too. Like, I don't think of Dave Bautista as a world-class actor.
Not at all.
Well, then that's that's neither here nor there. But
it's really more of a compliment in a way. I mean, and I know what you're talking about. You don't mean it in a bad way. You mean it as like it's just surprising to see like this WWF kind of type character be able to like deliver lines in a way that you would not think that they were capable of doing that, just in general.
Yeah, there's a fight scene at the beginning of the movie between Ryan Gosling's character and Dave Bautista, and then the fact that both can be physical and also deliver his lines, these emotional lines, it really sets the tone for the movie. And then he doesn't start it off, Denis doesn't start it off in that bleak, rainy universe that the first movie is. It's actually very bright, but it's dead. It's very bright, but the landscape is completely dead. There's a dead tree. There's a dried out house.
It's
the only signs of life are these grubs that are in the earth, and
I think that's in stark contrast to like the amount of water and everything else. Even though you're put in an urban environment, and I'm not spoiling anything, it's just the visual. Just talk about the visuals.
Right.
You have this rain, and it's constant freaking rain in the first film, and then you kind of see that. You don't see that until later on to kind of tie it in visually, I don't think, but like it's very much like everything's dead here. Everything's dried out. Everything is a memory. Everything is a freaking memory. And it's just interesting.
And even
it's almost like you're walking through somebody's brain.
Yeah, even the characters dead. The replicants. They're not so to speak alive.
Yeah, I don't want to get too in the avant-garde here or whatever,
Yeah,
but like
right.
what way to like I like to think of it is kind of like in a synopsis, it's essentially you're taking a walk through somebody who you're taking a walk through somebody's mind who's dying. That's kind of the sense that I always got like watching
Mm,
2049 that kind of stuck with me.
mm,
It took me a long time
mhm,
to like figure out that's what I felt like I was seeing. But like
mhm.
it's as the story progresses and
Mhm.
everything else, I'm just saying I'm not
Yeah,
giving anything away, but
right.
you're seeing essentially somebody walking through their own mind that is
Yeah.
dying, their moment
Mhm,
of death, so to speak. Like
mhm.
how
Yeah.
it's just interesting.
Yeah.
That's just me putting my
Yeah.
own,
Yeah. And
nerd.
there's yeah, and this is more more film noir in the sense that there's a actual mystery here as
Right.
well. There's they find a replicant core or bones of a replicant that appears to have given birth, and
Right.
this totally is not supposed to be possible. So the police wants to wipe all existence out of this. They don't want anyone to know. So this sets the replicant police officer, Blade Runner, off on the course of finding out where this possible child is, if it's alive, and then to retire it, so to
Yeah.
speak. And
And
then
and
and it
humanity. Yeah, sorry to just kind of touch on
uh,
like humanity as a concept is not viewed very well in either one of these movies. Like that,
no.
humanity is very much you're put on the outsides of humanity. It's not just humans versus machines or anything like. It's just like
Mhm.
you find that like these machines, these replicants, are not very well tolerated at all.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
so it's almost like humanity
Mhm.
rejected them and had like a like I have to take a shower to get rid of
Mhm.
all the sin, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, in the first movie, there's a real big question that leaves it open ended as far as is Decker a replicant or not? That's one of the big mysteries of it. And this movie kind of dives in and goes,
Yes.
okay, well maybe Deckard wasn't, but this guy actually is. And there's a very touching love story between this replicant, and he has
Tucker, you know.
a hologram computer
You're
that
talking about the one. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Sorry, I
uh,
thought you were talking about Decker. Sorry.
no, yeah.
Oops.
In the sequel, there's a love story between Kay, Ryan Gosling's character. I guess he goes by Kay or Joe, and then
That's
Joy is his.
his holographic girlfriend, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah. He has a holographic girlfriend that anyone could buy. She's the same girl, but yeah, she's you could there's this touching story between the two of them where she's building him up, and you really wonder, okay, how much is this just her programming, how much is his deep programming, and how the that two intermix. And again, it asks the big questions of what makes you human and what is a human. And that part of the story, as opposed to the first Blade Runner, that part of the story kind of brings the life to it, the hope, so to speak. And it's kind of odd that the most human characters in this movie are the replicant and his hologram.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's stunning visually and everything. Like
Mhm,
I would definitely give these both a full on recommend for
mhm.
sure to watch.
Yeah, and
And
one of the reviewers I watched, who reviewed it, was very upset that Harrison Ford was revealed in the trailers as being in the movie, which is definitely misleading. He's in like it's almost 3 hour movie, and he's only in the
it
last
is.
hour, and maybe in just two or three, no, well, about four different scenes. So he's definitely not a lead in the movie. Ryan Gosling is the main character, and it would have been nice if people got to see this fresh without knowing that the Harrison Ford character Decker is actually in the movie. But I can see it from the studio's perspective. Well, we got Harrison Ford. I mean, we gotta promote this,
Right,
Yeah,
right, right.
he's a bigger draw than Ryan Gosling is. But yeah, and
Yeah,
then also the same thing with Jared Leto. He was heavily put on the posters and everything, and he only has a couple of scenes. So
it's true. Yeah, that's fair. Like, yeah, I think this kind of suffered the same fate as the first one. It definitely made more money than the first one for sure. But
Mhm.
I don't think that it's definitely one that's going to grow. I have no doubt
Yeah.
about that.
Hmm. I think,
I think,
yeah, I think,
go ahead.
I think Dune is going to inspire people to go back to his older works, which Blade Runner is, of 2049
Oh,
is
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Yeah.
If people don't already consider him
Mhm.
I don't know, A plus top tier director, I don't know what else would convince them aside from that, like this. And it's kind of like when you find a new director that you were not aware of, doesn't matter who it is, and then
Mhm.
you realize, oh my god, this is not their first film, this is actually their 15th. And not
Yeah.
only do they do what they did so special in this one, it's not going to be the same thing, but they know how to
Mhm.
do what they're doing, and
Mhm. Yeah.
it definitely from the angle of how he likes to shoot cinematography, and it wasn't all him
Mhm.
on the visuals too. Uh,
Right, right.
and, but still, he shepherded everything together, and there are scenes like where this whole thing is. It's just you just the cinematography alone. Even if you
Mhm.
hate the film, again, I refuse to believe that somebody could watch this
Mhm.
film, even if you hate it, even if you hate Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, that you
Mhm.
cannot walk away from this movie and say, well, there wasn't a world that
Mhm.
was made, or I didn't know what it looked like. No, not at all.
Yeah.
That's never
Right.
going to be
Mhm.
uh, stunning.
Yeah,
I
you,
can't
you
get over the
wouldn't. Yeah, you wouldn't watch it and forget about it after an hour.
right,
I can't. I don't even remember what that was about. This
right.
is
Just
yeah.
yeah, it's just a marvel unto itself,
Mhm.
and it does deal with some concepts that are interesting.
Yeah.
Like
And the
Lenny James, like that's actually like where he survived, whatever. Like I'm thinking
yeah.
Walking Dead, and
Oh
how
yeah.
utterly shitty that shit show got. But anyway,
Yeah, and the fact that Loto's gotten even his his persona that people kind of see him as currently has gotten worse and worse. That kind of plays into this movie because he's just a complete evil character in this movie.
he is. Oh,
A deranged maniac. Just
Megalomaniac.
yeah. Mhm.
Just just bent on
Yeah. Yeah.
everything is a number,
Mhm.
there is no humanity in that character
Mhm.
at all whatsoever.
Right.
Like that's a
Yeah.
kind of shortcut way to say it.
And that's a kind of in sharp contrast to the original movie. There was the Tyrell Corporation that created the replicants in the original movie, and that guy, you can portray him as a villain for creating these replicants, but there's actually a heart and soul to the character, and there's a scene between Rutger Hauer's character Roy Batty with Tyrell that's very interesting and very there's a very interesting interaction between Tyrell, which is sort of a god figure, compared to this replicant that he made. Uh, and there's that very interesting interaction between the two where you get to see where each of them are coming from, and neither one of them sees themselves as the villain. And you could look at, like you were saying earlier, you could take either side. You could actually the movie doesn't draw a fine line of, okay, this is the bad guy, this is the good guy. It's very much how you perceive it personally. And in this movie, Jared Leto was taking over the Terrell Corporation, and now it's the Wallace the Corporation, I think it is.
Mhm.
But he's very clearly not a good guy. So we do have him as definitely, I'd say, the villain of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the great film. And, no doubt, I like it, but it
And
was.
I was going to say, what do you think of Denis Villeneuve as the modern day Ridley Scott? I was just thinking that this.
I'm not quite sure I would cast him in that light. I think he definitely has his own flavor. It perhaps if I had been first introduced to him in his films, I might go along more with that. But I definitely think that he is his own independent visionary, and I think that he does things that Ridley Scott could never do. And one of
Oh
those
yeah.
is that Ridley Scott films there's a substantial lack of color. What I mean that is like there's no brightness in his films, generally speaking. And I'm talking from the sci-fi vein, not necessarily all of his things, but
Mhm.
whereas I can find that brightness of color in Denis films, and Ridley Scott scenes on his own for sure. I just think that they're two very distinct ones, so I don't know that I would be able to answer that question because to me they're two very independent
Uh-huh.
taste and visions, and I thoroughly enjoy. There are things that I'll go back to Ridley Scott, even more modern ones that people don't like Prometheus or Covenant or those kind of things, more modern day things. Like I can still find joy in them, or I can still find that taste.
Mhm.
But I don't know. What turn it around on you? What do you say?
Maybe not visually because like you said, they are very distinct in how they see their world. But I the only reason I say that is that both of them can grab. They're not stuck in one genre. They're not just like say sci-fi guys. They're not
Oh no,
because
no, not at all.
Ridley Scott could do Black Rain. He could do uh, a more popular one lately is G.I. Jane, but he could
True.
go in through different genres, and so can Villeneuve. He could do, Prisoners. He could do Sicario. He could do Rival. Um, and even within his science fiction, The Rival, Blade Runner 2049, Dune, they're all distinctly very different. Uh, like how Ridley's Alien is different from Blade Runner. They they have a very similar visual sense, but they're very different stories.
Yeah, I think that uh, Danae, he can go into and do a lot more justice on the action side, but not
Mhm.
overkill.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying Ridley can't. It just he does it in his own way. So
Mhm.
there's two definite. What I prefer one over the other.
Mhm.
You know, probably Danae. I'm digging on him more because like well
Mhm. Oh
we
yeah.
live in a modern era where he is still
Yeah.
making his mark on the world. So of course I'm going to say
Mhm.
that. Like whereas Ridley
Right.
Scott is more. I don't think I still think he can make really great bangers of a film, whether
Mhm.
whether
Mhm.
they're super
And
popular at the box office.
yeah.
Neither one of these, and I love that.
Mhm.
I love that neither one of these authors
Mhm.
or directors
Mhm. Mhm.
are
Yeah, and
pinned down
that's
by that. Like it's okay
Mhm.
for them to take. They don't care if their next
Mhm.
film is a turd or so to speak. And none of their films are turds. Like let's just put it that way. Even the ones that folks don't like maybe Prometheus. Well,
Mhm.
you can't say that it's a turd. In my opinion, you can't. That's unfair because typically, if you have a turd, no studio will invite you back. And over time and time and time again, that's just not true for both of these guys. So the same
Mhm.
rules don't apply to them. Like that, there's a definite unique
Mhm.
lift that they can
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
And I think that there is I would be very, I don't know how true, I'm pretty sure that Danae is set to take over or set to do a rendezvous with Rama. And I love that, but that's like one of my favorite books of all time. And
Mhm.
I hope, I just know that he'll be fine, like
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Not to
Yeah.
kind of go
Yeah,
out too
and
far in left field, but.
yeah, and I think even when Denis' movies aren't like huge blockbusters, the studio knows he has an audience and the people follow him, and there's a greatness about his work. And I think that's maybe what I was kind of pulling from Ridley Scott, is that Ridley, and like you were saying, his early part of his career, mm, um was making coming out with these iconic um mind extending movies that were setting genre traditions, whereas that was going to be followed for years to come. Whereas I think Denny is kind of the modern equivalent, in that what he's doing now is going to inspire the filmmakers to come, and people will go back and reference him as the person that inspired them. Which it's kind of hard to say, being in the present, but it's my kind of prediction on things to come.
Yeah,
And
I'll get lambasted with this opinion, but I will take a Ridley Scott film any day of the week over a George Lucas film. And what I mean by that is, like, I think that George Lucas got rich very quickly, and there George Lucas and certain directors are always better when they have limits placed upon them, and when they don't have limits placed upon them, I'm not saying that they suck or whatever outright, because they don't. But you can definitely see that there is, like, where you have Dene, who has limits placed upon him movie after movie, even with Dune. And you also have that with Ridley Scott too, and they both rise to the occasion just about every single time.
yeah.
Whereas whether you like the film or not, at heart, the core of the film is still good. Whereas, like, and these are apples and oranges too, to a certain degree. But like somebody like a George Lucas, who's legendary, everybody bows down and gives him his own fiefdom or whatever, and that's all fine. I'm not taking away from any of that, but um, you know, I don't know, like, say past after like Return of the Jedi, what did George Lucas ever make that was truly, genre busting or thought mind melting or something like that? It just didn't. Mind you, they're two vastly different creators, and I understand that, but I'm just saying, like, much rather sit in the aisle of a Ridley Scott film than a George Lucas film, and then because you're going to get. So yeah,
Yeah.
I it is what it is. But that's a little bit far afield from what we're talking about. But just my
Yeah.
opinion, and that
And
doesn't mean that I think George Lucas sucks. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, I would rather sit down and watch a Denis film than a George Lucas film, or a Ridley Scott film than, like, something a little bit more. I don't want to say typecast, but the fix is in. But that's just my own personal preferences, just in general.
yeah. Yeah, I think I won't get too far into it, but yeah, the George Lucas, he had a great story to tell.
Sure,
And
and
he's
he told it.
also, yeah, and he told it. And I think that's, and he's a very technical person, and he did major advancements in special effects, and also
Sure.
in video games with Lucas Art. But yeah, I think he had that story to tell, and that was great. And he had a lot of stuff to give technologically to the industry, that lives on today.
Sure.
But yeah, he will. I In my opinion, he's not. He didn't have anything to tell beyond that core story. And that's fine.
And that's the thing.
J.R. Tolkien had Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. He
Very
told
true.
those stories,
Right.
and that's all he needed. But yeah, and there's a everybody's trying to make universes and multiverses. With Blade Runner, I don't know how good a fit that is. I know it was hasn't been successful overall with Ghostbusters, so to speak. But with this, they did early on, after I think it was the 90s, late 90s, they came out with a Blade Runner PC game, a point and click game. And I played that. I don't know if I finished it, but it was kind of fun. And that computer that Decker has in the first movie, where it examines the pictures and you find hidden. He was finding hidden details in it. Yep, that's the game. And I think it's is it on Steam or that's on GOG?
Yeah, good old
GOG.
games. Yeah.
The I don't know how good it is. I haven't played it since being a kid when it first came out. So
Oh,
yeah. But yeah, it was fun in that you were getting to examine the pictures and whatnot. But the fact that I don't remember if I finished it or not may contribute to whether or not it was a good game or not. Although it does have a 4.7 out of 5, so it may be something we can revisit. It
I'm
visually,
sure.
visually it has a great look to it. And you don't play as Decker; you play as a different Blade Runner. And then so that was back a while back, but they're trying to stimulate it. And obviously, 2049 wasn't as big a success as they wanted it to be. So I don't know if there'll
Right.
be more movies, but there are comic books. They came out with one, I think it's 2022 Blade Runner, and it looks at a female Blade Runner that's has a kind of a moral dilemma. I read that story arc. There's been one or two more. There's Blade Runner Origins that's coming out, or is I think it's coming out currently as a monthly series. But yeah, so if you wanted to dive a little bit
Oh,
deeper
yeah. Look at this. This is
into
fresh too.
yeah, into the Blade Runner lore, those I like I said, I read the first series, and that was pretty good. The art was really good in it, and it took the perspective of a female Blade Runner. I think this one, uh, I think it might take place pre, yeah, I think it's pre the original movie. So because it deals with the Terrell Corporation, and then there's also um in, in anticipation for the Blade Runner 2049, there was prologue that came out. I think they're still on YouTube. There's anime and two short films that one has Jared Leto's character in it, and one has Dave Batista's character in it. And those were on the Blu-ray that I watched, and I watched those as well. Yep, those are the
Very cool.
yeah all together. But
Yeah,
yeah, but
yeah,
yeah,
I
there's they.
yeah, I agree completely. They're definitely. I would be more interested in the comic books than the anime one. I probably won't touch that one, but
Mhm.
unless there's like, unless you tell me, hey, this gets good after this, whatever. But
Yeah, I'll give it a few more episodes. The art style, the animation, is sort of cheap CGI animation, so it doesn't have much, not a whole lot of a charm to it. So the animation is not going to keep me interested. So unless the story gets more interesting, I may dump it. But we'll see. Like I said, I'll give it another episode or two. They're real short. They're 22-minute episodes, so it's not a huge time investment.
gee.
So,
and
but mhm.
and anything else to add to the Blade Runner universe?
uh, I think that covers it. But yeah, it is one of those universes that you could dive back into, but with, like, say, the anime, I think you really need to have, if it's called Blade Runner, you really need to have a Blade Runner element to it, as far as that particular type character. You need that dichotomy of replicants and someone hunting them. Whatever twists and turns you play around with that, I think that's great. The this verse, um, and then you can improve me wrong. I mean, if there's like a tiny story that doesn't deal with replicants or the Blade Runners that you could tell about one of the citizens of this universe, maybe that would be interesting, but maybe that doesn't need to be in the universe to begin with.
Right. Yeah, I'd be interested to jump into the comic book for sure, or any, even the PC game that might be cool. But with that being said, I think that brings us up to our, and this is a perfect segue, I guess, to kind of hop into our comic books of the week. But like, I agree with you completely about Blade Runner. It's a love for me for sure. The original and the sequel. It's done, and it's probably I guess the final thing I'd say about it would be like, it's good that it kind of sucked, or was perceived to have sucked in the context of like not being so great of a success at the box office, because then we probably would have trash to watch or look at, and that is definitely something that I'm not interested in seeing. And this,
they might have
in this
they might,
timeline for sure.
they might have, if Blade Runner had been a huge success, they would maybe have ramped up a sequel, which most likely Ridley Scott wouldn't have done, and it would have been probably with a lesser director, lesser writer. At those times, sequels got less money to be made because they figured they would make less money. So you'd have the diminishing returns of another Blade Runner sequel, whereas this one was highly anticipated in that, it's 30 years later, and my gosh, is this movie that wasn't a box office success, but has a huge cult following, was able to come back and make this this second legendary movie, much like I'd say with like Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks was not it was initially a success, but then quickly dropped off and disappeared until the Netflix caused it to have another cult following, to come back, and it eventually returned with the third season.
Indeed. Yeah.